So we're going to take a look at section 12-1 through 12-4. So we are looking at solving problems with irrational numbers. We're talking about solving quadratic expressions through completing the square, as well as solving problems using the quadratic formula. And finally, we are going to use the discriminant to determine how many solutions a problem has. So those are the 4 problems we're taking a look at. And so the first problem, problem 4, we are being asked to solve. And these problems all are from the advanced section, and so we've got some really cool fractions and all this fun stuff. So here we go. All right. So to solve a quadratic, we really need to have a we really need to have it equal to 0, or we can well, lots of different things we can do. Right now I'm obviously thinking about the best way to do this. How do you guys feel about the fractions?
Okay.
You're okay with them?
I like decimals.
You like decimals more? You know what I like more than decimals?
Whole numbers.
I like whole numbers even more. So the first thing I'm going to do, just to make things a little bit easier for me, is I'm going to make everything a whole number. Now to do that, I need to multiply everything that has a factor of 5 and a factor of 6. So what number do 5 and 6 both go into?
30.
Thank you for raising your hand. Isaac?
30.
30. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to multiply all of this by 30. So 30 times 1/5 x squared, well, 30 divided by 5 is 6. So I'm going to end up with 6x squared. 30 times -2 is clearly -60. And 30 times 5/6, well, 30 divided by 6 is 5. 5 times 5 is 25. Okay. So now, we have this x squared, and we don't have a linear term, and we're trying to solve for x. So what can I do to both sides that will help get the x by itself? What can I do that will help me get the x all by itself? Yes, Kate? Let's add 60. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Let's add 60. You're getting this down, buddy? So we have 60x squared is equal to, that would be 85. All right, so now, what can I do to get the x all by itself? What's the next step in getting the x all by its lonesome? Evan?
Divide by 6.
Let's divide by 6. So I end up with x squared is equal to 85 over 6. All right. So now what am I going to do? Damien?
Square root both sides to get epsilon.
Let's square root x by... So I get x is equal to the square root of 85 over the square root of 6. Now, am I allowed to leave the answer like this?
No.
No, I cannot. Because, well, I do need it in simplest radical form, but also, can I have a denominator with an irrational number? No, okay. I need to rationalize this. That's right. So what will I do? So what will I multiply by to get the denominator to be a rational number? Johnny? Okay, so we're going to multiply the numerator by the square root of 6, multiply the denominator by the square root of 6. And so the square root of 6 times the square root of 6 is 6. All right. And the square root of 85 times the square root of 6 is going to be the square root of 510. And so that's going to be equal to x. But wait a second. Wait 1 second. When I square root, is it possible that we have two answers? Yes, because I could have the negative square root of a number, and a negative times a negative is a positive. Therefore, we will have plus or minus the square root of 510 over 6. And that is the answer, as luck would have it. Thank goodness. But wait, this is our simplest radical form answer. We also need a decimal equivalent, and for that we need a calculator. Yes? Remember? So let's take the squirt of 510.
Okay, that's really.
I know. Grace really doesn't like that either.
It's
But look,
3.76.
it says squirt. And we are going to divide that by 6. And so we get 3.76. Now, is that the only answer? No. What's the other one? Plus or minus. Okay, so we have plus or minus, and the answer over here should be 510 over 6, and that is also plus or minus. All right, so taken as steps, I mean, none of these steps are overly difficult. It's just remembering what comes next. Yes, Isaac?
Well, when it says plus or minus the square root of 510 over 6, is that where the quadratic formula?
So you could have solved this using the quadratic formula, yes.
But that's where you see it.
You could, well, yeah, that's true. You see it in front of the discriminant. That is true. Yes, Aiden?
So why did we multiply by 30?
Why did I multiply by what?
30.
Why did I multiply by 30? So I was looking at this, and I was stammering a little bit, and I'm thinking, you know what, that 1/5 and that 5/6, listen, I like fractions more than most, but I'm going to have a hard time solving something looking like that. I would feel far more comfortable if I were able to multiply everything by a number that would eliminate the denominator. So I asked the class, what number does 6 and 5 both go into? And that way, when I multiply everything by 30, the 6ths and the 5ths will be whole numbers. Okay. Yes, Sam?
So I kind of did it the other way without multiplying by 30. I just solved it as it was. And that seemed to be like quicker for the decimal.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that there are not other ways to do it, because you could have done it using the fractions. But I got the sense that, well, most people prefer using whole numbers to fractions. And that's a strategy I'm going to use for the next 3 problems as well. So that's why I used it here. Okay? All right, let's move on to the next one. So now we're going to solve a quadratic expression using the process known as completing the square. All right? And so I'm looking at this, and I'm going to start in the same manner. I don't love the fractions. So let's multiply by a number that will alleviate the fractions, leaving me with whole numbers, and that might actually be a little bit easier to deal with. So what number do 2 and 4 both go into?
8.
They both go into 4, but they also go into 4. Sorry, they go into 8, but they also go into 4. So let's go ahead and multiply this whole thing by 4. Y squared over 2 times 4 is
4y squared.
is not 4y squared.
It
It's
is
2y squared, because 4 divided by 2 is,
Oh.
so we end up with 2y squared.
Minus.
4 times negative y
Y.
divided by 4?
It's 1.
It's 1. Yeah, 1y, okay. 4 times 3 is?
12.
Okay. So now we have whole numbers. Now, unfortunately, we're going to get fractions again, so I apologize up front for the extra step, but this does look a whole lot nicer. For completing the square, we need to have a coefficient of the quadratic term that is 1. Simply 1. So what do I have to do so that instead of 2y squared, we just have y squared? Henry? Let's divide by 2. And so I'm going to divide everything by 2. And that would get me y squared minus 1/2 y is equal to 6. And obviously at this point you could say, well, in your first step, why didn't you just multiply everything by 2? And the answer is, I could have.
Why not?
Well, I wanted to get to the reason why I did this is I was trying to get to a problem that looked similar to things that you've had in the past. Right? Now, for completing the square, we need to add a term here that will make this a complete square. And we have to remember what we add to the left side, we also have to add to the right. Now, in order to complete the square, we're going to take the coefficient of the linear term and we're going to divide it by 2. So we have negative 1/2 divided by 2, and that would be negative 1/4. Then we are going to square negative 1/4, and that will be up here. So what is negative 1/4 squared? Thank you, Damien. You're doing great. 1/16. So we're going to add 1/16 to the left side there. We have to add 1/16 to the right. And so we need to factor this quadratic expression. What will it factor to? What will it factor to, Kate? Y minus what?
1/4.
Yeah, y minus 1/4 squared. And that is going to equal 6 plus 1/16. I know that 16 times 6 is 96 plus the 1, so we have 97 over 16. Is everyone with us so far?
Yes.
Okay. So what am I going to do to both sides in order to get the squared away from that binomial? What am I going to do, Ava? So let's square root both sides. So the square root of y minus 1/4 squared is 8. Now, does 97 have a perfect square factor? No. A square root of 16. Okay, a square root of 16 is 4. Yeah, I agree. Okay. Okay. All right. And as Isaac pointed out, you need to have plus or minus. So what are we going to do to both sides to get the y by itself? Plus 1/4. So we're going to add 1/4 to both sides. And I will get y is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 97, and that is all over 4. Now 97 does not, in fact, have any perfect square factors, so you cannot simplify it. In terms of simplest radical form, you are done. I don't hear any eurekas.
You're done.
Okay.
Eureka, I found it!
Thank you, Abdu. I knew I could count on you. Now, in terms of the decimal equivalent, we're going to have to take the square root of 97 and add it to 1 to it, and then divide by 4. So one of my decimal equivalents will be 2.71. But the square root of 97 can also be negative, and we would add to it 1 and divide by 4, which will give us negative 2.21. And so now we have our two answers. We have the simplest radical form answer, as well as the decimal equivalent rounded to the nearest hundredth. Are there any questions before we move on to the quadratic formula?
No.
Okay, I can see Sam wants to do it himself. So Sam, come on up here.
Oh no.
Come on. Oh, I definitely see it. Come on. Come on, let's go.